So today we have Lynn Blake with us. Lynn Blake is the instructor to many great players on the PGA Tour. Lynn Blake has worked with probably who we know best is Brian Gay. And Lynn has also worked with Homer Kelly, who is the inventor of the golfing machine. And Lynn is one of the few instructors on the planet who's had the opportunity to work personally with Mr. Kelly. And we are so glad to have Lynn on the show today. Lynn, welcome to Breaking Par.
Thank you, Bernard. Glad to be here.
It's great to have you. And there's so many questions that we want to cover today and talk about in instruction, because we feel that, and I know that as you're thought of by the instructors who work with you as Yoda, and
Right.
and I also feel that way about you. I feel that you're one of the Yodas in the golf industry, and have done so many different things and have great insight into the game, and we're really looking forward to finding out some of that information so that our students can know about that.
Well, thank you, Bernard. I'm not 900 years old yet, but I'm working on it.
Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing if we could be physically? It might not be too great though, because if everybody had that opportunity, we definitely would overpopulate the planet very quickly.
I understand. Well, I've been behind a foursome at three that sometimes I wonder if they're not working on that 900-year plan. Anytime.
That's very true. You got quite a nice voice there, a good singing voice.
Thank you.
Maybe we should do
My
a
wife told
duet
me I
here
couldn't
before
sing.
this
She was
is
right.
over. I didn't realize that. That's one of my little fortes too. Is the singing thing.
No, not me.
I don't know
Trust me,
about that. I
can't
think
carry
maybe
it.
you should
Happy
think
birthday
about that.
doesn't work.
So let's get down to business. So enough
All
of
right.
the formalities. So when you're here's the first question I really want to ask you is, what is the majority of the students that you work with? Do you find that you're working with overall better players most of the time, or are you working with the average player, the average amateur player?
Well, I work across the board for sure. Uh, uh, but I'm what's called, I guess, a destination teacher. I didn't frame that word, but somebody else has. Uh, Most my people come to see me, and they come from all around. They hear from me various ways, uh, and I'm not easy to get to. Particularly, you got to get into Atlanta if you're flying in, and then there's about a 90-minute ride out to our resort, which is Cuskawilla on Lake Oconee. So these people, my point in all this is they're coming on purpose, and they're coming to learn golf, learn how to play their own game better. And typically, these are not beginners. These are people who've worked on it a long time and are trying to get to the next level, but for whatever the reason, have run into some stumbling blocks of some kind. And it ranges from the people who are mid-handicaps, 8, 9, 10 players, if you will, to very good players. Many professionals, instructors come these days. And of course, I had my time with tour players, and still do. But in the main, it's people who just want to take it to that next level and for whatever the reason have not been able to get that job done. Sometimes it's getting a little desperate. I had a guy come into me not long ago. He was in his late 60s. And he says, I just don't want to die with a bad golf swing. Talk about pressure.
Oh my gosh!
Okay, let me see what I can do.
First thing I would say is, how old are you?
Well, it was pretty apparent he wasn't a spring chicken.
So he didn't have a lot of time left. In other
Well,
words,
you know, it was yeah, we never know that, do we?
that's true. That's
Everybody wants more time, but everybody has all there is. The great paradox.
That's true. So then, the bulk of the players that you're working with, you feel are probably single digit who want to move to the next level. And
Well, they're out of the beginner stage. Let's just say
Okay.
that they're out of
Right.
the beginner stage,
Okay.
and they definitely want to improve. But I've had, I got plenty of double-digit guys I've worked with, and of course, my job is that they don't stay double-digit much longer, and that happens a lot, by the way. We take them right out of that double-digit ranks.
So when you do that, what is usually the things that you work on right from the start, or are there specific things that you like to work on with most of your students, or are there, or is it usually just totally tailor made to the student and what you see they need to work on?
Well, obviously, everybody comes with a different problem, and for every different problem, there's a different solution. But in the end, we all have three things to control. We've got to control the club face, we've got to control the club head, and we've got to control the club shaft. And we've got to do that from the address to the top to the finish. And we use three things to control that. To control the face, we use a flat left wrist and its motion through impact. To control the head, we have a concept we call lag pressure, a driving pressure that takes the club through the ball. And to control the club shaft, more specifically, the plane of motion of the sweet spot. And there's the line of pull, the sweet spot's a little different from the shaft, but for all intents and purposes, we're talking about club shaft control. That's the inclined plane. And to control the inclined plane, we must stay on that plane, and we do that by monitoring the baseline. So the flat left wrist controlling the club face, the club head lag pressure controlling the club head, and the baseline of the inclined plane controlling the shaft from the address to the top to the finish. That's the mantra. And however the student is best able to do that is fine with me. But in the end, that's what has to happen.
And that's pretty much we feel with all students is that these are three mainstays that no matter what your level of play, feel like you feel like these are things that every student should be working on a regular basis, correct?
Well, there's really no alternative if you want to be a good player. You must take the shaft and left arm through the ball together. There's your flat left wrist. The inline condition of the left arm and shaft, we call that true rhythm. And that must be done on a plane that intersects the ball.
Absolutely.
And it has to be done with a driving pressure, not a convulsive throwing pressure. That's the only way to control it. So that's what that's all about. That sounds rather mechanical, if you will, but in the end, that's really what it comes down to. Lag pressure on a plane with the club face control.
Absolutely, I agree. And sometimes I might sound a little foolish in the questions that I'm asking, but I'm trying to think
Never.
of the way that our listeners out there in Par Nation are thinking, and what are the questions that they would be asking if they had this opportunity to talk with you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we're covering these type of things.
Sure.
So essentially, then now, when the left wrist is flat at impact, what is the production of that, or what do you believe makes that so important for the player to do? And when that happens, what is the result?
Well, most players don't swing through the ball. They swing at the ball. They have a steering motion wherein they're trying to keep the club face square to the target. And I mean square in an abnormally long period of time, as opposed to its normal closing only motion. They're trying to keep the club head on a level or an upward path instead of going down and out to the lowest point of the arc. That's all steering, and that's where you see all the chicken winging and all that stuff, and why you see all the bands around the elbows and stuff like that. I mean, the orthopedic bands around the elbow, because the body's not made to do that. There are tremendous forces that you're in conflict with when you do that. And the only way you can get this steering job done is by quitting. The hands quit. If the hands didn't quit, then you take the club on down the way it's supposed to go. So the hands quit. Stop, say, at mid-body, opposite the ball, instead of coming well in front of the ball, with the hands visually appearing to cover the left foot, as opposed to, again, right over the middle of the stance. So quitting is the culprit, and the players must learn to take that left arm and club through without quitting, without throwing the club head ahead of the hands. See, that's quitting. The hands get into about mid-body, and then they convulsively flick or flip the club through the ball, and that destroys totally the radius of the golf stroke, which runs from the left shoulder to the sole of the club. That radius needs to go through the ball together. Now it's gotten cocked, the club's cocked at the top, so the radius has been shortened. That's a geometric concern. The hands themselves aren't supplying power, but they are part of this process of delivering the power that originates, by the way, in the feet, at least in pivot strokes. And the cocked left wrist uncocks and returns to its inline condition at impact, and then goes through the ball in that inline condition before any recocking occurs. So this idea of the left arm and club going through together is really important. We're not talking about miles per hour here. That's pace of the stroke. We're talking about RPM, revolutions per minute. The hands and the club head go through the ball at the same RPM. The club head travels faster because it's further out on the circle, of course, and it's been given speed by these geometric considerations I've just mentioned. But RPM-wise, they go through together. Without that, really, there's not much hope.
Sure. So to put it in layman's terms too, that when that happens, there is a forward leaning of the shaft at impact, correct?
With the ball positioned prior to low point, yes.
Yes.
Low point being opposite the left shoulder with a flat left wrist.
Sure.
And most shots are played with the ball back in the stance a bit, you might say, in which case you will definitely have forward lean.
Right. So, and now that forward lean, then it gives more solid contact, higher on the club face, more compression, things of that nature. Yes.
Compression. Yes, compression is the answer. That's what the ball wants. The ball's welded against the face of the club, and they're both traveling around together now. No slipping and sliding on the face.
Now, here's some things that I have found as an instructor that when I try to elaborate or get that point across to a student, sometimes students still use their arms a little bit more, but they're trying to create forward shaft lean, and even though they're trying to hit through, they end up holding it off and pushing the ball. I want to say that what I usually try to get them to do is have a little bit more of a weight shift and a rotation with their core to allow that to work more as a unit and not kind of hold on to the club so long. Do you agree with that? Is that the weight must shift by that point and the core must rotate?
You're using your pivot to deliver the club. And that's absolutely right. The left arm, I mentioned that, the left arm and club, the left arm's not pulling itself through except in the smallest stroke, like a little putting stroke.
Right.
A Dave Stockton type putting stroke. He says he pulls only with his left arm, but the left arm in a pivot stroke certainly is not pulling by itself. It is being pulled. So the body pulls the arms pull the hands pull the club. So absolutely, and I would start this whole idea not with yes, an emphasis on the flat left wrist, but with a very small strokes, 2 or 3 feet back, 2 or 3 feet through. And people have a difficult time doing that at first, particularly the higher handicappers, simply because the very nature of their stroke is to stop the hands when they get about mid-body, and the mid-body hadn't moved over because there's been no weight shift. So that I'm just say the middle of the stance. And then they flip the club. They accelerate the club head. They don't accelerate the hands. So all this emphasis on the club head takes the emphasis off the hands. I teach hitting the ball with pressure in your hands, not hitting the ball with the club head. The club head does what the hands do. The hands are the boss. The hands are the master of this whole situation. They're your only connection with the club. They're the clamps. They're not there. They don't move the club by themselves, but they are the connection. Not one message goes from the sweet spot to the brain and back again without going through the hands. They are the command post.
Agreed. And I totally feel the same way. That has to happen. I think that the problem with some players, though, when they hear that, is they get their hands a little bit more active and not quite as passive. And that's why they're trying to like lift the ball or things like that.
Well, I do a couple of things there, Bernard. One, I would encourage anybody listening to this, get a golf club and grip it all the way down at the bottom of the hosel. I mean, your right forefinger is right there at the club face. And now, just swing your hands back and through, back and through. Not in a full swing, please, not in a full swing. Just 2, 3 feet back, maybe waist high, 2, 3 feet through. Just a little right, left, right, left. Step to your right foot, swing your arms back. Step to your left foot, swing your arms through. Step, swing, step, swing, step, swing, step, swing. Holding the hosel of the club.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the good player feels when he swings a club. How is that club going to get away from you? Gripping it that low? Well, now grip it up, say 6 or 8 inches higher. You still got it, right? Now grip it in the middle of the shaft. You still have that club totally under control. But once you get near that butt end and that club starts swinging on its own and your hands are turning and cocking and uncocking and rolling, that club wants to take over. And especially with this seemingly inborn instinct to hit the ball with the club head instead of swinging through it with the hands and arms, things just go bump in the night big time. So do that little exercise. Grip it all the way at the hosel. And right, left, right. Get a little mark time movement going with your feet. This gets into your idea of using the pivot to deliver the club. Right, left, mark time, just like a soldier, just like somebody in band. Right, left. Standing still, just right, left, right. Load, unload, load, unload. Load the right foot, swing your arms back. Load your left foot, swing your arms through. Back and through and back and through and back and through. It's what Jordan Spieth does every time, about 5 or 6 times before every single swing he makes. Only he's holding the club at the handle, not at the hosel.
Sure.
But that gives the idea of what your hands really are functioning as. They are there as clamps to control the club face. They are not there to flip that club head through the ball.
Yes. So now, what do you think makes even a higher level player have a tendency to do that sometimes? Feel like they're trying to get more at the ball or make the ball the as opposed to swinging through the ball.
Well, there's any number of reasons. Of course, you've got symptoms, and then you've got causes. One thing, of course, if you're off plane, and it's so easy to get off plane, either under the plane, in and around, if you will, or over the plane, steep. If you're off plane, or let's just say it another way, out of plane with the ball, which is what we need to stay in plane with, the ball. If you're out of plane, you must throw the club to get back in plane. That's your computer, your mind, this thing you've got working that controls the entire operation. Its big directive is hit the ball. Thou shalt not miss the ball.
Right.
And you're coming in higher, you're coming in low or something. You're about to tear up the ground behind the ball or miss it from the top or something. You got to somehow or another get back in plane. And the way you do it, of course, is you throw the club. And that's, again, that's not a good thing. The great players get up every morning knowing they're driving the club. But being on plane is a huge part of it. If you're off plane, you have to throw it. If you're on plane, you'll just continue to drive it. There's no reason to throw.
Now, do you notice when students take a practice swing or work on a tempo without a ball that their body is more functional through than at?
I always start without a ball and always without a club. That simplifies things, doesn't it?
Okay, yeah, absolutely, yes.
So I have a program that's based around the ideas of Bob McDonald, who was a wonderful teacher and player way back in the 20s and 30s. And Bob McDonald had a book he called Golf, Golf. It's in very rare supply now. It costs $300, $400, $500. If you search for it, maybe you can find a little better deal, but I doubt it. But anyway, there are on my website, lynnblakegolf.com. We have somewhere, I'm sure, in a media center, we have these 11 exercises, he called them. We would today use a more popular word, drills, but it's very simple. The first 4 teach the pivot. The last 2 teach you how to use that pivot to provide a wonderful startup to your stroke. 5 and 6 teaches you a free arm swing. 7 teaches you a classic address. And then 8 and 9 teaches the free arm swing with a club added. The law of the flail, effortless power, if you will, geometric power is all included in those simple little exercises, and they have a magical effect. And I've had all my tour players do it as well. So this isn't limited just to the guys and gals just getting started here. This is absolutely fundamental. So I'll give you an example. I had a school here at Congressional here a year or so ago, up in Bethesda, Maryland, and 16 professionals. Of the 16, only 2 were the first 4 exercises again are pivot. 14 of the 16 had issues with those 4, and the 2 that did not were the best players, 1 female, 1 male in the crowd. So just because they look so simple, maybe they are simple, really. But there's a million ways or more to goof them up, and people show me every day new ways to screw them up. And but boy, does the door open wide when the fundamentals come in.
Absolutely, and I know that even the greatest players in the world usually say when they're working with things with high level instructors like yourself, that fundamentals are the things that they're working on, and they're getting back to fundamentals. And that's what I think that for the weekend guy or gal out there who plays once a week and goes out and practices, that it's important for them to work on those fundamentals consistently. I think what happens is a lot of them, when they work on them a little bit and they think they got it, that's when it turns around and bites them, because now they're not paying attention to those things, and they're just and they get kind of lackadaisical, and they don't work on them consistently.
And it's so easy to get caught into the details, and I'm not saying details aren't important. In the system I teach, which is the golfing machine, you mentioned that earlier in the top of the broadcast. Which is, you mentioned Homer Kelly being an inventor, and that would seem to mean that the golfing machine is in fact a machine like Iron Byron or Ping Man that they use to test these golf clubs. No, it's not. It's a book.
Right.
So the golfing machine, Homer Kelly was an author of a book called The Golfing Machine, and in that book he codified, cataloged, if you will, 24 basic components. And you don't have to put those in. You've already got them. You got feet, knees, hips, shoulders. You got a way to grip the club. You got a way to take it back, a way to bring it down. And you had it the first time you picked up a club. The only real difference between the tour player and the average player, other than talent, I guess, and a lot of experience, is the more and more precision that can be brought to bear on the various components that make up the relationships here in the total golf stroke. So that's our job, is to get more and more precise. Well, Kelly gave us those 24 things, and then the precision that can be brought to bear on those 24 things. But he also gave us the catalog of 144 different ways to do the 24 correctly. So that gives you, if you do the math, roughly 10 trillion ways to get it right. So it's certainly in the method system. It is a system, and it recognizes that these various components exist and that they can be coordinated and integrated to produce whatever stroke you want to do, from the 1-inch putt to the longest drive you're capable of hitting. So that's the essence then of what I teach and how I go about it.
I know that my first encounter with the golfing machine was through I was actually asked to give some insight on my methods, and it was more about an indoor facility at the time that the gentleman stopped down. He was ready to open up an indoor facility in North Jersey, and he saw that mine was very successful, and he came down to pick my brain, and then he started to ask me about my methods of teaching and what I taught and what my thought on the golf swing was, and I mentioned a lot of different things, and he said to me, "Oh, your golfing machine," and I said, "I don't even know what golfing machine is," and this was probably about 13 years ago, and then he actually then proceeded to give me the book, and he said, "For your time that you've spent with me today, I'm going to give you this book. And I want you to see how the parallels of a lot of the things that you're teaching are in this book." So, of course, I studied the book, and then I learned so much more than what I came up with, of course, on my own. But a lot of the things I saw parallels with, And then I've also seen a lot of those things parallel with what Bobby Clampett does with the impact zone, because I'm one of those guys who is certified by Bobby Clampett too.
Cool.
And a lot of the same things. And I know that Bobby Clampett was one of the very first students of the golfing machine.
Yeah. In fact, he was, because of his fame, his wonderful play as a teenager, 18, 19, 20 years old. He was one of the best amateurs in the world. Had finishes and high finishes in several professional tournaments, including U.S. Opens, still as an amateur. And without that, I would never have heard of his teacher, Ben Doyle, or the golfing machine, or Homer Kelly, and then started this wonderful journey I've been on since 1979. So, yeah, a tip of the cap to Bobby. And I mentioned earlier this thing about the details, and then I went off talking about details in terms of how much precision can be built in. But people get off the deep end here before they get the basics of it. And the basics of it you can learn in these simple exercises of Bob McDonald. Again, 1927. It's not like any of this stuff is new. And think about combing your hair, for example, with a comb in hand or a
I would
or a
if I
brush.
had some.
Okay, all right.
I
Well,
don't have any
okay.
left.
Well, all right, wax. All right, we'll do waxing your hair then. Waxing your head, sans hair, and just think for a second. But you got your hands holding the brush, and that's all it's doing really. It's holding the brush, and your arms, your forearms are turning, and your palms are supinating and pronating, and all those wonderful biomechanical terms that we instructors like to throw around. But you're just brushing your hair, for goodness sakes. We are, as the good book says, fearfully and wonderfully made. So we need to trust a little bit of that and not take this thing down to the last muscle twitch. And simply learning to swing your arms back and through and back and through. The only real difference, I mean, obviously, you got a club and you got a ball and you've got a game that needs to be played. But the only real difference between walking down the street, putting one foot in front of the other foot, loading one leg, loading one foot and unloading the other, and then vice versa, swinging your arms back and forth, if you will. The only real difference in that in golf is that you're not moving and you're swinging your arms side to side, but in the exact same timing. Once students get that big idea, and it's such a huge idea, golf becomes a far more natural thing to do. It is natural. See, I've heard all my life, and your listeners have heard, golf is an unnatural game. Well, the golf swing is an unnatural thing. Well, it's what it is a learned skill. No, we don't come out of the womb knowing how to grip a club correctly, knowing how to stay centered and swing a club at speed while we're controlling the club face. No, that's something that has to be learned. Just like typing has to be learned, just like writing has to be learned. But once it's learned, and it should be learned, using perfectly natural motions, the same motions we use every day. So you can perform this learned skill using perfectly natural motions. And in fact, you better do it that way. Why? Number one, only that way can you be most efficient. You're not fighting City Hall, if you will, your own physicality. And number two, you don't risk injury. So much injury we see today is because the body's prevented from moving in the way it should, or it's made to move in a way it shouldn't. There lies sorrow.
True, absolutely a true statement. So would you think though too, in the same breath here, that when we do that, when we walk, when we do all these things that come natural to
Right.
us,
Mm-hmm.
there's absolutely no thought process of physical motion or what we're doing, and we should kind of eliminate that in the golf swing too. Correct?
Well, yeah, if there's not any thought anymore, but there was a great deal, that first 10 months, walking was only a dream.
Yes.
The first 4 or 5 months of that, you didn't even have kneecaps. It's kind of tough to walk as a 4-month-old when you don't have kneecaps. But time on the belly lets you know that other people are doing it different. It wouldn't be nice if you could too. Well, the first steps are stumbling, but then it won't be long before you're tooling all over the house. Same thing with typing. You ever call somebody a natural typist? Like
No.
a natural golfer? No, you set anybody down first day at a keyboard and say, okay, type something. just gibberish. They don't, at best, if they want to actually get it right, they'll hunt and peck. But you let them train for a year. R, T, 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 S, 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 U, 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 Z, 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 Z. You do that uh, thousands of times with all fingers of all hands from set positions on the keyboard, and guess what? You're running along at 80, 90, 100 words a minute. But that's not a, now you say, oh, he's a natural typist. No, he's a trained typist. She's a trained typist. That's what it is. Golf is no different. Think about writing your letters. I got grandkids now. Watching them learn the alphabet's a real hoot. It is not natural to write letters. It's a learned skill. Well, today we don't think about them, but there was a time we thought a great deal about them. So I will say, yes, motion should be natural, but because we've learned to move in natural ways, and we've learned some things that work and some things that don't work. I mean, the kid doesn't have to learn the little baby sitting in a high chair doesn't have to know the law of hydraulics to learn how to keep milk in the cup. He learns pretty quick. You're not do this, it falls, spills.
Right.
Milk seeks its lowest level. So boom. So yeah, a lot of these things we think are natural are learned. They are learned skills, but they are performed in a natural way.
So then in golf, the way that we're learning those skills is via drills, correct?
Well, certainly, I'm a big believer in, particularly once you start adding in precision, that there are relationships here. So I mentioned you're swinging your arm side to side, but ideally they would be swinging parallel to a baseline. And that doesn't mean the hands aren't swinging up and in, because they are swinging up and in as you move, but the feeling is of staying parallel. The club is definitely moving in an arc, not covering a line, but the shaft remains pointing at the line. Sweet spot remains pointing at the line. See, so you can't just let this motion take you any old where. You need to stay on plane, which gets us back to the top of this conversation. The club moves in an arc, in an on-plane arc. And that doesn't mean the plane stays the same. The plane angle in almost all players shifts. And usually it shifts from a lower angle to a higher angle and back down to a lower angle. But all the time, the baseline stays the same. So the plane angle is much less important than the plane line, the baseline of the plane.
Now, when you're working with tour players at an event, what are the things that you have them work on in preparation before a round?
Well, before a round, we're not working on anything.
Okay.
Really. No, we're working just getting loose, getting ready mentally. The work has been done. If we're still working on this past Tuesday, might as well start packing the bags.
I think maybe. Well, I agree with you there. I think maybe what I meant to say is, what are they doing to get ready? Or not as an essence of working on a position or a specific
thing. These are the best in the world. They're getting loose, if you will, warming up, getting the feel of the club that day. It's not really any harder than that. Making sure their lines are right, they're lined up, that the ball's going okay today. That's the main thing. I mean, they're not really, at least they shouldn't be working on anything really mechanical. Again, if they are, they're headed in the right place, and they won't play as well as they could.
Oh no, I agree. But a lot of those guys, they're hitting the range, they're hitting a certain amount of shots, they're working on, let's say, some shots, short game shots, or stuff inside of 100 yards.
Of course,
they're pitting. They're doing all these things.
They're getting the feel of their stroke that day. They're getting in touch with their total motion. How does it feel today? That's the main thing. And the speed of the greens and obviously that kind of thing. But it's the feel. But it's the feels of everything they worked on up to that time. They're not trying to get a new feel.
Oh no, I agree. So what I'm trying to get across to our listeners today in that aspect is that when a tour pro is going before his round, same as you would go to your normal round to go play, that there should be that you shouldn't be working on mechanical things before a round, that you should be working on feel and what's going on that day and hitting a few shots and because that's what a tour player would do. A tour player is not going to specifically work on drills or things like that, at least not the ones that you're working with.
Right. They'll usually, at least most of my players, will have an alignment rod down. So there's your subconscious reminder. I mean, look at Phil Mickelson. Before every practice round, he'll put down an alignment rod, a stance line alignment rod, and he will take upwards of a minute to get it just right. And then he'll stand behind it and plumb bob it. So if one of the great players of all time is taking a full minute just to get his alignment rod right, what does that say to us? I can't tell you how many lessons open up with me, and I'm sure with you too. And after 4 or 5 swings, I'll say, "Where are you aiming?"
Yes.
And they'll say, "Well, I really didn't have a target. I'm out there." I said, "Well, okay." I said, "Well, I knew I didn't know. I did, but I didn't know that you didn't know." Let's don't do that. Let's put down a rod here and at least figure out where it is we're trying to hit the ball. So anyway,
I know that for me, I try to get all my students to use alignment sticks on a regular basis when they're practicing, so that way they have a target in mind and they can use that as a reference point. And I consider actually an alignment rod almost as much as like a training aid.
well, it is definitely a training aid. Between that and an impact bag, I mean, those are basics. And I'll give every one of my students a starter set, if you will, of 3 rods, and 2 are for the to to uh, to lay along. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to use complicated language here.
Sure.
2, which will lay along the target line, if
Yes.
you will, for a normal shot. 1 will be, let's say, a foot or 2 in front of the ball, right on the target line. That's the one I'll position first. It's aimed dead at the target.
Yep.
Then I got the ball, say 18 inches behind that, and then 18 inches behind that, I got another rod, also aimed right down that target line. So here's a golf ball there, and on either side of it are 2 rods pointing directly at the target. Then I'll lay down a stance line rod that's parallel to those 2. So that gives me a parallel stance line to the target line. Now, the target line is also, though, the baseline of the plane for a normal shot. And that becomes very important to know where that line is and to be able to visualize it. Why? Because that's what we need to be pointing at with one end of the club or the other, unless the club's parallel to the ground, in which case, parallel to the ground, the club shaft will be parallel to the line. So in startup, the sweet spot's pointing at the line. As you move into the backstroke and the wrists start cocking, the butt end of the club's pointing at the line. Regardless of the angle, which is probably shifting, you maintain the inline relationships with the baseline of the plane. Well, if that line isn't down there, what have you got to align to? And I have several drills, if you will, that help students to align to that baseline. One easy one is take an alignment rod. They're typically 48 inches long. Put it under the, grip it under the heel, put it under the handle of your club.
Mm-hmm.
So it's essentially matching the length of your grip.
Yes.
And now you got this, the rest of the rod, say 40 inches of rod or so, is now stuck out behind you. And now you can't miss whether or not you are parallel to the ground or whether you're pointing at the line as you near the top. So that just to get the idea into the person's head that you are pointing at the baseline. Now here's one thing though, unless you're moving properly down below, and it's a huge error in almost all the golfers I see, they're not. The right hip is not clearing. The feet and the knees are basically dead in the water. There is no way, unless that right side clears out of the way, that the arms can lift the club up properly on plane, which is really what the arms are doing. They simply lift and lower the club. But most people, if they truly lifted the club in the correct way, in a very natural way, just stand still and lift the club up over your right shoulder. Well, that's what the arms do. Well, obviously, that's pretty un-golf-like. That's almost like chopping wood, right? It would be. Well, we add to that a pivot. And it's dead where it ought to be. And if you stop at the top of your pivot and turn around and look, you've swung your hands right up over your right shoulder, ideally. So that's what's going on in the swing. But if that lower body doesn't move, then the hands and arms can't work like that, and all kind of weird stuff starts happening. Not the least of which is the guys who palm down with the left hand, and that club shaft now points well outside the baseline. They're all wrapped inside, and they're in a total recovery mode from that point on. And that all started because they did not have the correct pivot mode. And now we get back to McDonald exercise number 2, which teaches you how to turn the hip, and then McDonald number 4, which teaches you how to integrate the shoulder turn with that hip turn. With that, you've got the pivot of the great champions of all time, and now your arms can swing free. This is the essence of a golf stroke. The only way to hit a golf ball powerfully and accurately is with a free arm swing. But the dirty little secret of the golf stroke is the arms need a lot of room to swing. And if the right hip isn't clearing out of the way on the way back, and then clearing out of the way on the way through, the arms cannot possibly swing the way that they should.
Sure, because they're going to run into the body, correct?
And then the hands can't possibly supply their directions. So the body supplies the pivot, the rotation, the centrifugal force idea. The arms supply the power. The hands supply the direction. Body, arms, and hands, 3 zones, all coordinated, produce the results for a particular shot at hand.
Now, what I find too is that, and I use the straight plane line all the time, and I mean, and that again is, like I said, a lot of the things that I base my teaching on is also in the same type things that you base your teaching around. I find that a lot of players, when we talk about the sweet spot at address and being on the target line, that as they go back, when they try to get the sweet spot to stay on the target line a little bit back, as they start back, that they end up coming off plane. So do you?
Which way?
So in other words,
over the plane or under the plane?
They come over the plane actually.
Are you talking about picking it outside? Picking the club up outside?
Yeah. Well, they're like taking the face itself and trying to keep it square to the target line, and when they do that, they're actually getting the shaft steeper as opposed to like maybe. And here's the other thing that they're doing is that the face is not now starting to rotate open, the toe starting to open up as they take it away. So do you, as a feeling of that, and I want you to your insight on this. I try to get them to point the heel of the club or the shaft itself more at the target line as they take the club back, which will keep them more on plane because the shaft is now on plane, and that the face will begin to rotate open as they take the club back, and then when they continue to hinge the left hand to the top, then the butt of the club now is pointing at the target line at the top.
Right. Well, the face of the club is going to do what the left wrist does.
Right.
Left wrist is the master wrist. That's your master control. The right wrist, if it moves at all, goes along with the left. So, and this gets into a discussion that really is virtually impossible to cover in a short telephone conversation, and for sure impossible or made much more difficult without demonstration.
Yes.
But the hands need to know what they're doing. I mentioned early on educated hands. Well, you need to teach them at least the various motions. I'm going to go through this very quickly. There are 3 planes of motion. Horizontal plane of motion, just wag your hand back and forth and back and forth, back and forth.
Right.
Or perpendicular motion, now just go up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down.
Yep.
Or rotational motion, turn palm down, palm up, palm down, palm up. So those are the 3 planes of motion. Well, within each one of those 3 planes, you have 3 wrist conditions. For example, in the horizontal condition, you have at the one extreme bent, at the other extreme arched. In between those, you have flat. So you have flat, bent, and arched. In the perpendicular plane, you've got cocked, and you've got uncocked, and then you've got a mid condition we call level. In the rotational plane, you've got turning and rolling. Turns to the right, rolls to the left, and the mid condition is vertical. So impact becomes flat, not bent and not arched. It's level, not cocked or uncocked. And it's vertical, not turned or rolled. So flat, level, and vertical is a precision impact. Well, it helps a student to understand what those conditions are.
Sure.
And then if you know where they are at address, and address is not impact typically.
Yes.
And if you know where they are at the top, and that maybe the left wrist condition doesn't match the right wrist condition, if you know where they are at the finish, you actually have a chance to play this game and to play it much better than what you're already playing. And it sounds like a lot dumped all there inside of a minute, but that's all there are. There's only 3 planes of motion and only 9 wrist conditions, 3 in each plane, and that is it. And it's child's play. My granddaughter, age 8, understands that.
Yep.
By the way, have you ever looked at their books?
Yes.
Don't sell those kids short.
Yeah. Oh no, I totally.
So
agree.
this is basic stuff. And how do you stay on plane? You point at a line. Well, what do you point at the line with? Well, with your right forearm and the sweet spot. That's what you point at the line with. How do you stretch out? Well, there's some right triceps action going on, but all that becomes part of the startup. And if you know there are 4 perfect alignments in a perfect startup, well, then what are they? And if you learn one a week in a month, now what's a perfect startup worth to you? Well, as it starts back, so it tends to come down. So I think it's worth a lot. Is it worth a month? And it doesn't take a month to get a perfect startup. But most people have no idea what that is, so they wind up, okay, this guy won this week, or this gal won this week doing it this way, so I'm going to try it that way, and then this guy won this way, and the next week somebody else won this way, and you wind up a year later, you don't know where you've been, where you're going, or how you got there.
Right.
There's just no plan, and
Right.
That's really the tough thing. Guys who want to do it and gals who want to do it, they don't have an organized, systematic way to do it. This ought to be a game where you can put one foot in front of the other foot and get better and better and better over time. And unfortunately, that's not the way it works. We take one step forward, 3 steps back, another 2 steps sideways, and we have no clue what we're actually trying to achieve. We are so lost in a world, a maze, if you will, of detail and pseudo-sophisticated, complicated confusion. We have no chance. It's got to come back to something natural. And if you can get it down to walking and swinging your arms, you got a chance. Otherwise, you'll never be the player that you could become.
That's a great way to wrap this up, and that's excellent insight. And as for players to be a lot more natural and to not go overboard. So before we leave, and or wrap this up, how can our listeners get in touch with you if they have the desire to work with you and to pick your brain?
Okay, well, you can text me or call me directly. I do return messages on my personal cell, 770-527-3841. One more time, 770-527-3841. That's really the best way. Email Lynn, Lynn, at lynnblakegolf.com. Lynn at lynnblakegolf.com.
Well, Lynn, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you, Bernard.
And I'm so glad that you agreed to be on the show. And it's
my pleasure.
A master of the game and understanding, and it's so much knowledge, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to have you on again at a later date, because there's so much more that I would like to ask. I could probably spend the whole day here, and because I so enjoy speaking with you.
Well, thank you, Bernard.
Looking forward to getting that opportunity once again. So for Breaking Par, thanks again for being with us, Lynn, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Bernard. See you down the road.
All righty. Bye-bye.